You probably have this dream apartment in your head when you decide to move to New York City. I think everyone does at some point. But sometimes you realize after looking at the prices of New York City apartments that dream is not going to be a reality. At least that's what happened to me. There's probably no way that you're going to be able to afford that dream apartment that you always wanted. And I do have to say too, movies and TV shows, when they're showing somebody living in New York City, that does not do reality justice, because a lot of times those apartments that are in those movies and TV shows are not realistic for people moving to New York City. When I first moved to New York City, I had an extremely tiny apartment with no frills whatsoever. And it wasn't that cheap. As a New York City real estate agent, I help people move to New York City every single day. And I do have to say, I actually recommend that people spend less on their first apartment when moving to New York City. Now, the funny thing is, I actually make more money when people spend more, but I still have this advice. And this is because when you're first moving to New York City, you're most likely not going to spend a lot of time in your New York City apartment. You're going to be out and about. You're going to be at bars, restaurants at night. You're going to be doing activities, meeting new people. You're most likely not going to be spending all of these hours in your apartment like you may in other places around the world. There's so much going on in New York City. And I also almost say to people that if you're spending all this time in your New York City apartment, there's almost something wrong, and you're probably not having that good of an experience, because most people don't spend time in their apartment here. Now, there's one exception to the rule, and that's if you work from home. Now, if you work from home, you might feel like you might want your apartment to be a little bit nicer or bigger or better because you're going to be spending a lot of time there. Now, there are two things that you can do. You can consider working in a co-working space. Co-working spaces are all over New York City. Now, a lot of people think of WeWork, but there are tons of other ones as well. And I literally want to say, I think they're in every New York City neighborhood at this point. And they're also in the outer boroughs as well. So you might have to go a little bit further in the outer boroughs, but they are there. You can consider working in a co-working space, or you can even just consider working in coffee shops and cafes and things like that. Tons of people who work from home do this because they don't want to be in their apartment all day. So you can choose to spend a little bit more money and go for a little bit of a nicer apartment, or you can consider one of these other options as well, because I know that so many people work from home nowadays. But I do advise to just save some money, put the money towards living the best life that you could possibly live in New York City, and just don't overspend on a New York City apartment if you don't have to. Now, there are two things I want you to consider. Make sure that you're comfortable in the New York City apartment that you pick, and also make sure that you feel safe in the New York City apartment you pick. I don't want you to compromise those two things, because there are sometimes people who just don't feel comfortable in their apartment. So what do I mean by that? If you feel that your apartment is dirty, it's falling apart, and you sacrificed the price so much to the point where like you just don't feel comfortable at all, you shouldn't have to live like that either, because then you're never going to want to go back to your apartment. And I have seen lots of people in New York City feel like that because they just picked an apartment that was so run down to live in a certain area that they wanted to live in or something like that. And that's just no way to live. You don't want to feel completely uncomfortable like that. Now, when it comes to safety, I don't want you to go for the cheapest apartment in a neighborhood that you don't feel safe in either. You should feel safe there in the morning, at night, at all different times of the day. If you feel a little bit uneasy in a New York City neighborhood, but you're like, I'm gonna go with this because it's so cheap, that's probably not the best move for you either, unless that literally is the top of your budget. So if you can afford to spend a little bit more and live in an area that you feel a little bit more comfortable in, that's gonna be the better move. So those are two things I don't want you to sacrifice. I don't want you to sacrifice comfort or safety, because those two are gonna be very important. And if you sacrifice those two things, you're just gonna hate living in New York City. And I definitely don't want you to hate it. So that is my take on an extravagant New York City rental. I do think that there's a time and place to move to a nicer New York City apartment, and there will be a point in your life where you can upgrade, but it might not be today.